guys, and welcome back to my channel for another Mystery Monday video. As always, these videos are not intended for children under the age of 14, and due to the graphic nature of true crime, viewer discretion is advised. I just want to quickly remind you that I do have a Patreon, and tomorrow starts the 12 Days of Terror Countdown to Halloween over on Patreon. So, if you would like to be a part of that, I will leave the link in the description box. Okay, so today's video was actually requested over on Patreon when I asked which videos they wanted to see covered for the 12 Days of Terror Countdown. And when I read it, I was like, oh, the Cecil Hotel haunting. That doesn't sound like I'm not super into paranormal, so I decided I would cover it, but I wasn't like super into it until I learned about the dark history and some of the haunting things that have happened there, and then I realized why it had been requested. This is honestly one of the most creepy haunting stories that I think I've ever covered. Definitely one of the scariest stories I've ever heard of. So there have been a lot of things that have happened that definitely point to some paranormal activity. If you happen to be into American Horror Story, they had a whole season, I think it was season 5, that was called Hotel, and they basically got their inspiration from the Cecil Hotel. And the Cecil Hotel is just kind of a terrifying place, so I'm going to go over a little bit of the history. We'll go over a timeline of the events, and then we will talk about probably the creepiest case that happened at the Cecil, in my opinion. In 1924, William Banks Hanner poured millions into building a hotel. It seemed as if the hotel would be this very high-class and extremely successful place. It was very luxurious. It was 19 stories high, and it had been built with the finest materials available at the time. But then the Great Depression hit, and in the years that followed, the area surrounding the Cecil Hotel slowly began to decline. And in order for the hotel to try and keep their doors open, they started lowering their rates. The area around the hotel became known as Skid Row, and soon the hotel became home to drug addicts, sex workers, and criminals. The Cecil Hotel has a long and dark history filled with tragedy and death. The first known death was in 1931 when W.K. Norton was found dead in his hotel room after ingesting poison. 1 year later, Benjamin Dodge checked into the hotel, but when the maids went to clean his room the next day, they found him dead from an apparent self-inflicted gunshot wound. Now, a suicide note was not found in his case, and I guess this was very abnormal for the times. People usually always left suicide notes explaining why they had chosen to end their lives. 2 years later, Sergeant Louise Boredom was found dead in his room after slitting his own throat. They did find a note in this case, and it stated that he had a lot of health problems and just decided to end it all. In 1937, Grace E. Marco fell from a 9th-story window. where she later succumbed to her injuries. And police were never able to determine if she had fallen, if she had jumped, or if she had been pushed. In 1938, Roy Thomas, a 28-year-old Marine who was staying at the hotel, was found on the skylight of a nearby building, and it seemed like he had jumped to his death. In 1939, 39-year-old Edwin Neblett was found dead in his hotel room after ingesting poison. In 1945, Polly Singer had ingested poison. She was found unconscious and rushed to the hospital, where she later died. In 1944, Dorothy Parcell and her boyfriend Benjamin Levine were staying in the hotel. Ben was 19 years older than Dorothy. Dorothy would later claim she had no idea that she was pregnant, but she went into the bathroom while her boyfriend was asleep in the bed and gave birth to a baby who she claims died during childbirth. She didn't know what to do. She freaked out. She didn't want her boyfriend to be angry with her, so she threw the baby out of the window, and it landed on a neighboring building. There was really no way to tell if the baby had died, like was stillborn, or if the fall had killed it. But she was charged with murder and later found not guilty by reason of insanity. In 1947, Robert Smith jumped from the 7th floor of the hotel. In 1954, Helen Corley also jumped to her death from the 9th story. 8 months later, Pauline Otten jumped from the 9th floor window. Well, according to her husband, she jumped. The two were staying there. They had gotten into a big fight, and he claims that she jumped out the window. He could have pushed her, we don't know. On her way down, she ended up falling on a pedestrian, killing them both instantly. Up to this point, there is a lot of jumping out of windows and a lot of poison deaths. In 1964, Goldie Asgood, who was known as Pigeon, was found dead in her hotel room. The room had been ransacked and she had been stabbed, beaten, and sexually assaulted. In 1975, an unidentified woman jumped to her death from the 12th floor. Then we have this long 20-year stretch where there are no deaths, and it almost seems like the darkness that has surrounded the Cecil for so long is kind of lifting. But the most paranormal incidents were still to come. In 1992, an unidentified man was found dead in the alley behind the Cecil. It was believed that he had been pushed from the 15th floor. In 2015, a man was found dead in front of the building. So there's definitely a lot of dark things happening in this hotel. There's a lot of negative energy that could potentially open the door to a haunting. Violent deaths are said to bind spirits to this realm, and they just can't escape. This energy builds and then kind of stays stuck in certain areas. So, was this hotel inhabited by spirits? There were also several corpses of drug addicts found in hallways of the hotel and in alleyways behind it. Not only did a lot of people die, horrible violent deaths in this hotel, but some pretty awful people actually called this hotel home. Serial killer Richard Ramirez was living at the Cecil when he killed 13 people between 1984 and 1985. He was known to just walk into the lobby in his underwear, or sometimes even completely naked, and it is believed that he would go commit these crimes, strip off all of his clothes with the evidence and leave it in the dumpster of the Cecil, and then just walk naked back up to his room. And at this point, like, this hotel was just seeing stuff like this all the time. This didn't even, like, it wasn't even questioned, this behavior. As long as this man paid his $14 a night, no one was going to kick him out. 6 years after Ramirez was apprehended by police, serial killer Jack Unterweger moved into the Cecil, and he actually used it as a home base for his journalistic investigations. So basically, under the guise of being a journalist, he would go on these ride-alongs with the police where he would actually scout out his next victims. The last, and in my opinion, kind of the creepiest event that is known to have happened at the Cecil was the death of Elisa Lam. Elisa was born in Vancouver, and after high school, she enrolled at the University of British Columbia. In 2013, at 20 years old, she really began struggling in school. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she also suffered from depression. But this was not something she was ashamed of. This was not something she kept a secret. She was very open about her mental health struggles, and she often talked about it on her social medias. And she also kept a blog. Because of her diagnosis, she was taking an antidepressant, a mood stabilizer, and an antipsychotic medication. She was not known to have suicidal thoughts or any kind of hallucinations. This medication cocktail is considered pretty normal for someone who suffers from bipolar. So, anyway, back to school. She's taking 3 classes, and she's really struggling with her mental health. So she begins to drop. First one class, then another, and then finally she just completely withdraws from school. She decides she needs a change. She needs kind of a break, something to take her mind off the day-to-day life. So she decides she's gonna take this trip to the United States alone. She had always wanted to see California, so she heads to San Diego, where she stays a few days before heading to LA. On January 26th, 2013, she arrives in Los Angeles and books a room at the Cecil Hotel. She had seen the Cecil Hotel online, and it looked pretty cool, plus it was cheap. But she had no idea about the hotel's haunting past or the types of people who stayed there. Elisa didn't have a ton of money, so in order to stretch her budget, she first checks in and shares a room with 3 other girls. However, this didn't last very long, because soon after she checked in, her roommates started to notice some strange behaviors, and they complained to management, and then she was moved to a private room. Elisa was planning on staying at the Cecil Hotel until the 31st, but then on the 31st, suddenly all contact stops. Now, Elisa had been in contact with her family during this entire trip. She would talk to them several times a day. So when she just suddenly completely stops calling and checking in. They start freaking out because she's in this other country alone. They can't get a hold of her, so they call the police. And at this point, police go to the hotel and they realize Elisa never checked out. She just kind of vanished. So they begin searching for her, but they find nothing right away that suggests foul play. They look through her room and the lobby of the hotel, but it's not like they can just start searching through every single room, and they don't find anything to suggest where she might be or what might have happened. They decide to bring in canines and they search through the lobby, they search through her room, through the hallways, and even out onto the roof, but they don't pick up her scent anywhere. Police canvass the area, talking to the guests and hotel workers, trying to get some sort of timeline. Police began canvassing the area, talking to guests and hotel workers, trying to see if anyone saw anything or if anyone knew anything. They also began going to nearby businesses to see if perhaps anyone outside of the hotel had seen Elisa. And they find out that on the same day she disappeared, she had gone into a bookstore and was buying books for her family to take back as souvenirs. She was talking to the owner of the store, and she was saying, like kind of joking around, hoping that she could get all of these heavy books back as she traveled back home. And the owner of the bookstore remembered she was very nice, very friendly, and she didn't seem to be acting weird at all. Police never mentioned if they were able to recover these books that she bought at the bookstore. In fact, I wasn't able to find any information as to if they recovered any of her belongings at all. By February 6th, the police still have not found anything. So they are reaching out to the media. They are begging for people to come forward with information. But still, police have nothing. They don't even know like where to steer the investigation because she's just gone. Then, on February 19th, something ominous begins happening at the Cecil Hotel. The water coming out of the faucets in the hotel started coming out black. The water smelled and tasted awful, but no one knew what was happening. The hotel had 4 large water tanks on the roof, so they send someone up to go check the water tanks to make sure there's not a problem with the filtration. So a janitor goes up and he begins checking them one by one. He opens the heavy metal lids on the water tanks and peers inside, but they all seem to be working normally. Nothing looks out of the ordinary and the water is clear in all of them. But then he gets to the 4th tank, and there, floating face up in the tank, is the nude body of Elisa Lamb. Police are immediately called, and they do confirm that this is Elisa Lamb's body. Her clothes were also found inside the tank, but they were not on her. The clothes were said to have little particles of sand on them, which was similar to the loose gravel and sand on the hotel roof. So this suggests that at some point Elisa took her clothes off and left them on the ground before throwing them into the water tank, or someone else did. But police found no evidence of foul play. As they processed the possible crime scene, there was nothing found that indicated autopsy was done right away, but it took a while for them to get the results. In the meantime, police began pulling surveillance footage of the hotel, and they stumble upon some of the most troubling CCTV footage they've ever seen. The footage is looking down from the top of the elevator. We see Elisa enter the elevator, and then she bends down and begins pressing buttons. Then she steps back and waits, like you would if you got into an elevator and pressed a button. She's just kind of standing there. She takes a step out, and she looks almost frantically out in the hall. Then she goes back in, and she seems to be hiding in the corner of the elevator. Then she peeks back out again, and honestly, the really weird thing here to me is nothing is happening with this elevator. The doors aren't closing. She has pushed several buttons, but the elevator is standing still. Then she peeks her head out again, looking to the right. She walks off the elevator and is standing in the hallway. Then she gets back into the elevator and again goes into the hallway, but she moves to the left, almost out of frame. You can just see the very edge of her. You can see that she's putting her arm up again, and still the elevator isn't moving. The doors have not even tried to close. Then she steps back in. She begins pressing a lot of buttons. And then she gets back out of the elevator, and she turns, and it seems like she might be talking to someone. Her hands are out. She's moving them in a very bizarre way. But in the meantime, you can see the elevator buttons are completely lit up, but the elevator is standing still. She finally walks out of frame, and weirdly, as soon as she is out of the elevator, out of the frame, the elevator doors finally close. And then we are seeing the elevator doors open and close, open and close, stopping at each floor because she had pressed a lot of buttons. The eerie thing about this is that when she was in the elevator and standing right in front of it in the hall, it didn't move at all. And police are dumbfounded by this footage. This isn't the only footage that police found with Elisa on it. They also found some footage from the lobby where she is seen entering with two men. They give her a box and she takes it. She gets into the elevator and goes up to her room, and the men are never seen again on the video. Police did choose to not release this, and I really couldn't find out anything else about the box, but I'm sure police followed up on this and they are just not releasing the information. In June, her autopsy was released. It said she was found in the water tank with moderate decomposition. She had one small scrape on her knee, but other than that scrape, there were absolutely no other signs of trauma. No bruising, nothing. Her cause of death was ruled as drowning. There was no evidence of trauma, and her toxicology report did not show any drug or alcohol intoxication. It does go on to talk about her bipolar disorder and how they tried to test her body for the presence of her prescribed medications, trying to see if they were found in her system, then that meant she had been taking them, but if they had not been found in her system, she may have been possibly suffering some kind of manic bipolar type of episode, but they said that due to the limited sample availability, they were not able to perform these tests. The coroner did say that it is not believed this was a suicide, and the death is classified as an accident. There are a lot of theories about this case, so I'm just going to talk about the most common theories here. The first theory is that Elisa had taken some kind of recreational drug, and she had had a mental breakdown caused by this drug. The second theory is that something paranormal was happening. Maybe she was possessed, but definitely something weird was happening. She was acting strange. The third is that she was having some sort of manic episode caused by her bipolar disorder. And the fourth theory was that she was a victim of foul play. Now there is a fifth theory in this case, and it is something I came across on the internet, and it is a pretty haunting theory. This theory basically suggests that she was playing a game that allows you to communicate with spirits from another world and enter other dimensions. I will actually be kicking off my 12 Days of Terror countdown tomorrow over on Patreon, and our first video will go more in depth into this incredibly dangerous game. And honestly, this is by far the scariest theory because of the history of the Cecil. It just makes it that much scarier, and it definitely does point to a more paranormal type of situation happening. So you can join us over on Patreon tomorrow for that. Thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for all of your support. Let me know what you think about this hotel. Is it haunted? Did all these incredibly horrible things happen because it was haunted? Or was it just kind of because it was located in an area where drug overdoses and suicides did happen, and it has nothing to do with anything paranormal? I also want to know what you guys think happened to Elisa Lam, so let me know in the comments. We will kind of continue this tomorrow by talking about this creepy game that it is theorized Elisa Lam was playing. I just quickly want to cite my sources for this video. I got information from discovery.com, an article called "The Cecil Hotel is known as LA's most haunted for many horrifying reasons," written by Ruben Westmus. Dailyfilm.com posted an article by Beck Heim titled "Is LA's Cecil Hotel the most haunted in the world?" AllThat'sInteresting.com article by Katie Sierra titled "The Chilling Story of Murder and Hauntings Inside Los Angeles' Famous Cecil Hotel." A Wikipedia page about the Cecil Hotel. All That's Interesting also had an article by Natasha Ishmak titled "The Unsolved Mystery Behind the Disturbing Death of Elisa Lam." People.com had an article by Stephen Helling titled "What Happened to Elisa Lam, who was found dead on the roof of an LA hotel in a water tank." And Medium.com had an article titled "The Peculiar Death of Elisa Lam."